Today, I'm going to be putting a remote start system on my Honda Ridgeline.
Seriously, I just had it.
I bought this kit by MPC on Amazon, and the reason that I chose this particular kit is because I didn't want to have an extra remote on my keyring. This uses your stock key fob and all the stock wiring in addition to the remote start system so that I don't have an extra clunky thing hanging around in my pocket because that drives me bananas. Here's a quick look at the kit itself. It is a universal kit, so they make these for a multitude of different makes and models, and then they customize them for a Honda, Acura, Toyota, whatever. So there are a ton of wires in this kit, and of the 50 or so wires that come with the kit, we're only going to be using about 15 of them. So in order to start out, I'm going to separate the ones that I need from the ones that I don't need per the instruction manual, and then I'm going to hook everything up, make sure that it functions properly, and test it out. And then I'll get rid of all the 34 extra wires that I don't need in order to tidy things up so that I don't have bunches of wires underneath my dash. The first thing I need to do is figure out where all the wires that I'm going to need access to are in order to install the kit. And according to the instructions, there are 3 different areas that you'll need to gain access to. One of which is the fuse panel, which is located right down here near the dead pedal. This is how you access it here, but obviously we're going to need to gain further access. So we're going to have to pull this piece of trim and this piece of trim off in order to gain access to those wires. And there are 2 areas, one on this side of the steering column and one on this side of the steering column. So we're going to have to pull the cover off of that as well. First, we'll remove this piece of trim. You'll take your little fuel lever, pull that off just to get it out of the road. And then starting up top here, we're just going to pry this piece up and it just pops right out. Pull up on this trim here. You can remove this. This plastic piece right here will rotate a little bit, and then you can just kind of pull it out. And then this assembly, you kind of pull out a little bit and then pull forward, and you just kind of wiggle it out and move it up over top of your hood release. That'll give you access to the wiring that we need to get to on the fuse box. On the underside of the steering column, you've got 3 Phillips heads to remove. To remove the trim, I just pushed in right here and lifted up on the top. There are clips here and then one in the way back. If you reach your fingers down underneath and push in, it should separate. Be careful because this side is kind of sharp. There's a similar setup on the passenger side. You'll push in on the bottom here and lift up, and then this clip should separate, and then your trim pieces should be loose. Now you've got your clips undone. Take your tilt wheel and put it down, and that'll allow you to wiggle the bottom piece of trim off. It didn't take me long to run into my first problem with buying a universal kit. In the instructions, it is saying that the parking light switch is over here, and this picture looks to be a Honda Pilot, and in a Ridgeline, they aren't on the dash column at all. They're down and to the left. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to need to pull the trim out to gain access to the parking light wires. In a Pilot, your lights are controlled here, and the wires for them would be down here. But in the Ridgelines, they are over here. So we're probably going to have to pull this piece of trim off in order to gain access to those wires. Now, this isn't a huge deal. If you grab right here and just gently pull back, this whole piece of trim will pop out, and you'll have access to those wires right there. Underneath at the fuse box, we're going to need access to these wires. That'll be your 12-volt feed, your starter, and your ignition. So we're definitely going to need access to these. According to the instructions, this plug right here is one we're going to need to have access to as well. But I'm going to confirm that before I go any further or start cutting into any wiring or anything, just because the directions are just a little generic, and I want to be sure that I've got the correct wires before I start cutting and splicing into things. Things are a little tight down in here by the fuse box, so in order to make access a little bit easier to those wires, I'm going to pull some of this trim back just so that I have a little bit more working room. In order to do that, you'll pry this guy off, and then you can undo this screw, which should allow this to pop out and give you a little bit more wiggle room in through there. Once you pull this screw out, you just gently pry back on this. It just clips together, and then you can kind of move that up and out of the way, and that'll give you a little bit easier access to the wires underneath. Now that I have access to all the wiring in the truck, I'm just going to review the instructions here, and I'm going to separate all of the wiring that I will need from the wires that I supposedly don't need. I'm going to tape up the unnecessary ones and just kind of set them aside for right now. And then once I install it and confirm that everything's working, then I'll remove those wires later. You can kind of follow the diagram of what you're going to need in the instructions and separate those wires. So what I've done so far is I've isolated all the wires that the instructions say that I need to use, and I've left those loose, and I just coiled up and zip tied everything else up and out of the way. In the off chance that I will need one of these wires, it will be almost impossible for me to remember or put everything back. So just to be on the safe side, I'm leaving those in for now. They'll be in the way a little bit whenever I'm doing my install, but better safe than sorry. I'm pretty confident that I could remove all those wires now and not have an issue, but I would just rather be safe than sorry. In an effort to be thorough, I've documented all the wire colors where I need them because this printout's a little bit faded, and I've also documented where these wires are going to go in relation to their position in the car. That way I can separate what's going to the fuse panel, what's going to the light switch, what goes to ground, and what goes to the steering column. And I've just kind of bundled those together. That way I can get an idea of where all of this is going to fit and go in the car once I get to installing. I've decided I'm going to start in the fuse panel, which in the directions will be these wires here and here. And just a thing of note, when you're jumping off of here, if you have any place that you need to cut the wires, you want to make sure that your yellow and red goes on the plug side and then the yellow and green goes on the wire side. That's what I'm gathering from this. Same goes for this one here in the steering column. One more thing of note as far as the instructions go, this yellow wire that comes and connects into the fuse box here, that is required if you want to use your OEM remote. So you'll definitely need that one. All right, welcome to the real party. We're down here in the fuse box. This brown and black wire right here, it's about the 4th or 5th one in. We're gonna jumper that wire. That one's gonna go to the brown wire in your remote start. And then according to the instructions, this yellow wire on the far side, that's the one that we're gonna need to cut and splice into the yellow and red on this side. And then on the vehicle side, that's gonna be yellow and green. So we're gonna need to remove this loom in order to gain access to this wire and just make it a little bit easier to get at this brown and black one right here. Back up on the underside, there's a small black clip that this wire loom is kind of zip tied to. I removed that from the housing and pulled it up over top of the emergency brake release just so that I could get the electrical tape and stuff off of here and isolate the brown and black and the yellow wires. Being that there's not a whole lot of room to work with in through here, I want to be very careful about where I cut my yellow wire to give me enough room to get my connectors in there whenever it's all said and done. I'm using these angled butt connectors here just to make things a little bit easier. They can give you a little bit more room to maneuver the wires and move them around whenever you're cutting and splicing stuff in, and that'll make things easier for me to disconnect if I ever had to later in the future. If for whatever reason I put the wrong wire on the wrong side, I can quickly switch those out and correct the problem. Before I get any further, I don't want to have a mess of wires, especially these big ones, wrapped up and tied up and zip tied to make a mess in through there. So I'm going to figure out where I'm going to mount this guy up in the top side here, and then I'm going to kind of cut any excess length off of these as necessary. That way I don't have just globs of wires everywhere. That's just kind of a personal preference. You can just put it in and zip tie or whatever, but that's not the route I'm going to take. I found a good location to mount this up here. There's a big wire loom that I'll be able to zip tie all of this to. In the meantime, all these extra wires that I have are so in the way of what I'm doing and where I want to route wires. I'm a little bit more OCD than most whenever it comes to this. So I'm going to take a bunch of pictures of all these wires, where they go into the sockets, and then I'm going to remove all the excess wires just to get them the heck out of my way. I'm hoping that's not going to be a huge issue or I don't run into problems later, so wish me luck. Now, in order to remove all the excess wires, which is literally every single one of these except for 2 wires in this portion, it's pretty straightforward. You can take a small pick and then you just push in right there, and these wires should just pop right out. Now I just need to do that like 50 more times and it should be good. For these red and white connectors, to get the wiring out, there are these little plastic tabs right here, and you just take your pick, gently pry up and pull out, and those wires come out even easier than the other ones do. When it comes to this particular clip, you're probably going to have some issues getting these wires out unless you have a very specific tool that comes down on either side in order to push these two little barbs on either side in. And it fits in on either side, and then you can just gently pull those out. But these little barbs here and on the other side here are the ones that are going to probably give you trouble. If you're not going to use the wires, you could cut them off right flush. But if you have the tool, you can get them out pretty easily. I found that if you put a needle in, just a push pin, and push the one side in, and then go to the opposite side and push it in, that you should be able to release those and pull the wire out. Now we can get rid of all this unnecessary wiring and move forward with the project. Just a quick note, I did leave this thick gray wire coming out of this harness until I figure out whether or not I can use that later. Here's the simplified unit. What I've done is I've taken all the wiring that's going over towards the fuse box, grounds, and light switch and isolated it over here. I've taken everything that's going up into the steering column and I've moved it off to the side. And I've zip tied it together, but I've also added on the LED light and the push button for programming purposes, just to make sure that I could get those in and still have this zip tied for mounting purposes. Well, things are looking a little bit messy up in there, but I have the unit mounted. And that brings me to where I have all my wires that are going towards the fuse box and that need to be connected over there. And then I have my grounds and my light switch on the other side of the gas pedal there, just to get them out of the way while I'm working on these bigger wires here that go into the fuse box. We're going to move on to the bigger portion of the project where these bigger wires need to get connected. This is going to be a little bit tricky. Going to pull this out. I've put the e-brake down just to get it out of the road. Probably going to need to take some of this electrical tape off in order to gain access to these wires and splice everything in. Just as a friendly reminder, whenever you're pulling this out and you're cutting into these, you want to have the battery disconnected just to make sure that you don't have voltage going to the wires as you're cutting and splicing them. The first wire I'm doing is the yellow wire on the harness. It goes to the pink wire with the white stripe on the remote start system. I'm using a heat shrinkable solder connection to make sure that I get a good solid connection and that the wires carry voltage. You could use a butt connector if you wanted. There's no problem with that. This is just based on personal preference, and that's the route I'm going. The next wire we're going to do is the black and white wire on the harness. It goes to the brown wire on the harness for the remote start. As you can see, I forgot to put my heat shrink on, so I had to electrical tape this one, but I put the heat shrink on for the next one, and that'll give things a little bit of a tidier look. Now we can take the black and yellow wire and splice in the pink. The last one I have to do here is the white wire. It gets connected to the two red wires that go into the remote start system. I'll probably come in from either side in order to splice those in. Quick note, this yellow wire needs to go to the ignition wire, which goes to the pink wire that comes off of this harness, and it ties into the black and yellow wire on this connector here. I obviously overlooked that, so being that this is all done here, I'm going to splice into the pink wire along here and tie that in. Now that I have everything down here done with the exception of the two ground wires, I'm going to focus up here on the light switch where the white wire gets connected in. In order to do this, I've just pulled this back, disconnected the cargo light and the light switch so that I can tap into this blue wire right here. It looks as though someone might have been in here before because this looks like duct tape, and so I don't know if someone tied in to the light function for the dimmer on the aftermarket stereo. That's probably what happened. I'm not 100% sure. Doesn't leave me a lot of room to work, but you know, the silver tape in there is a definite clue that someone's been in there before. I've got the light switch buttoned up. Now I need to take the black wire and the fused red and black wire and run those both to ground. You can see right here, I already have a secondary ground for my fog lights, my aftermarket fog lights. I'm just going to tie right into there and get those two grounded. We're down to the last 3 wires. These ones are going to run up underneath into the steering column. So I'm probably going to take these and run them up along this loom here so that I can tie in where I need to up top. The last 3 connections that we'll need to do under here are on this clip on the back side. You can just undo it. We'll have to strip the loom. The wires that we're looking to splice into are the blue and orange and the red and blue. I've isolated the red and blue and the blue and orange wire. On the connector side of the blue and orange wire, we're going to connect the white and red wire, and on the car side, we're going to connect the white and green wire. The red and blue wire will get spliced in with the blue, light blue, and black. Got all the wires spliced in. I'm going to plug this back in, reconnect the battery, program the module, test it out, and if everything works well, then I'll be able to come back and do a wire tuck and secure all these wires and get them taped back up. Okay, we're under the dash here. So the instructions state that you need to unplug everything out of this module, and then while holding in the button, you need to plug in the power, and the LEDs should light up red, and it should stay red whenever you let go of the button. If it doesn't stay red, it tells you that something's wrong. That's the first part. Now that we're confirmed red, the instructions state that you need to plug in the remaining connectors. Okay, we've hit the program button twice. Now we've got a red flashing LED, which is good. Next, we put the key into the ignition and turn it to the on-run position, which should give us fast blinks, and then it should turn blue and flash rapidly. And it looks like we're good there. Now we're going to turn the key off, and the blue LED should, another blue LED should turn off. So it looks like we're programmed successfully here. If you're still with me, you're either a close friend or you really wanted to know how to do this. So here we go. Nothing. Oh, I just hit the button one too many times. Sounds like we might have something. Well, that's not good. Why didn't it start? It tried. Ah, hey, second time's a charm. That's awesome. I figured out what was going on. There's a little bit more programming that I need to do to the system in order to have it working 100%. At this point, I've established that the remote fob does work to start the vehicle, but it's cranking over first, and then it's cranking over again, and then starting. You need to program the tachometer to the system so that it knows what's going on. And after I do that, it should sort out the problem. Just because it's going to be a little bit easier to explain this outside of the vehicle rather than inside the vehicle, in order to program the tach, you start the vehicle and within 5 seconds, you hit the valet button 5 times. At that point, you'll hear 5 clicks come from the control box underneath, and then you hit the valet button 1 more time, and then you'll hear 1 click come from the control box, and then you hit the brake pedal and you'll hear 1 last click, and then your programming is complete. In order to exit programming, you turn off the vehicle. So you start the vehicle, within 5 seconds, hit the valet button 5 times, you'll hear 5 clicks, you'll hit the valet button 1 more time, you'll hear 1 click, then you'll hit the brake pedal, you'll hear 1 last click, and then you can turn off the vehicle. Okay, let's test this one last time. Hey, success. All right, so from what I've been told, if you hit the button 3 more times, it'll turn the vehicle off. And we're done. Yes, it works. That means I can do a wire tuck, clean up everything, put my tools away, and now I have a remote start. I'm excited. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Oh yeah, one last thing. This little red LED light, completely optional. If you don't want to have a discotheque underneath your dash, then you can just get rid of it, just like I did.